Hello and welcome back. For today, I have already queued up Chapter 14 at the River Jordan. The waters of the Holy River were reached. A whole actual horde of Vikings arrived at the ancient and auspicious place of the Jordan, and they all got naked and jumped into the waters. Their commander, Harold, did not join them in this, and Harold the red-haired could not run for his leg wound. Thus, all but the heralds ran into and jumped to swim in the Jordan. Fitbjorn's long black hair clung to his back and chest as he stood waist high in the water, feeling the calm flow wash him clean. The gore of battle, the sweat of travel, and the grime of not performing his weekly cleaning had built up in what must have been a terribly offensive scent. He and his friends, other than the Christian ones, bathed in the river and cleansed the road from their bodies. The Christians were doing a whole ritual bathing thing upstream of them. Inga sat on the banks of the river. She'd taken a cloth wrap and had it tied, soaked around her. She looked at the water and up at the Christians as they did their ritual, Harold guiding. "Ever bother you?" she asked. "Not really," Bodil said, scrubbing under her arms. "You mean the preference of place for the Christ-fearing ones? Not enough to complain." She shrugged. "As long as the loot is distributed without preference," Niels said. "And we all get to fight. The same glory," Hafvald said. "The same wine, too," Bodil said, tying her long hair up over her head. "It makes sense, though, doesn't it?" Niels said. "It does?" Inga asked. "Why are they so favored, then?" "Because Harold has to answer to the Emperor. He is a Christian. The whole empire is Christian. That is why he does this." He gestured as Harold dipped a man into the water. "Do you want to know something?" Harold had said. "I am too." This he'd told to Fitbjorn as they stood together looking over the lands of Palestine. They had been talking about Thor, referencing his mighty hammer. What had that meant? Was Harold truly a pagan? Did he lie about being a Christian? Or was it that he told every Varangian that he secretly believed with them, that they believed? A way to have everyone fight the stronger for him. Could he do that? Would not he anger both gods in doing so? It was too strange a thing even to contemplate now. "Well, so what if the Empire is Christian?" asked Hafald. "Does that mean anything?" "It damn well does," Niels replied. "How could the Emperor continue to employ and enrich a foreign army? Consider the vast accommodations made for us. Think about how much we are given in this empire. That all is allowed by his council and his people because the leader is a Christian. That is something they can abide. Were he a pagan and a foreigner, might be harder to sell the idea. Especially since the Empress had her eye on him," Inga said with a sly smile. "That's nonsense," Bodil said. "Lied to bolster his fame, no doubt. Men love to talk about how high power women desire them." Niels looked at Bodil and narrowed his eyes. "Bodil, do you want to fuck the commander?" he asked, and she turned on him. "Watch your tongue, Wrecker. Such an accusation is hardly worthy of you." She looked over her shoulder at the Christian rite being conducted. "I wouldn't mind fucking him at all, actually." They all laughed at this. "Do you not have the sensible urges of a man, Niels?" "Of course I do, but never when out on the raiding. I keep my activity to when we are back in the city, or if I find a brothel in a town." He shrugged. "You know I have Hafald," Inga said when Bodil looked on to her. "What about you then, White Bear? Is there a love you are engaging in?" He thought back to the woman Gertrude, that strange and wonderful woman. "No," he said. "I have no skill. supplied Niels, and they laughed together again. Give me something to eat, he said, still laughing. Inga reached into a sack beside her and threw a piece of bread to him. You think Harold is going to ask the rest of us to join in some ceremony with the rest there? Asked Hafald. By the gods, I hope not. I haven't ever laughed openly in the face of my lord anywhere, and I hope not to have to start today, Niels said. Then he held his nose and submerged into the water. When he came up, he saw Hafald standing with Inga. He was drinking from a horn and standing before her, tall, wide shoulders, proud. What are you drinking? He asked. Here, have some. He handed over the horn and Niels took a drink, then spat the black liquid into the water. What in the nine realms is this? Is this coffee? He asked, looking into the horn. Why is this coffee? And why is it cold? Nowhere to heat it, he replied with a shrug. And besides, I like it cold. He took back the horn and drank again. Gods! I hope none of the Christians were looking at me just then, he said, looking up the river. Why? Asked Bodil. If they did, they could have seen me waist deep in their holy river, sputtering black evil from my mouth. He stuck out his tongue and waved his arms around menacingly. They laughed together at his folly. Fitbjorn looked on with admiration for his ability to always bring laughter out of those around him. He had learned much from the man and hoped his ability to tell story continued to improve, though he seemed to have few opportunities in this land without the nightly fires around which story always was told best. He'd thought 100 times about telling the story of what he'd experienced after taking the vision mead. He'd seen death, lived the afterlives, seen terrible and wonderful places. The inevitable question that would arise, however, was, why didn't you see Valhalla? And that was not a question he wanted to answer. Once the washing was done, they simply lay in the sun and let the heat dry them. It had been a long road. There'd been much blood, dust, and work. Fitbjorn laid on his great cloak and basked in the sensation of cooking, the sun's rays burning away the water and drying out his long hair. He let himself fall asleep in the peace of the moment and came to love the calm of the River Jordan. They stayed the whole day at the river mouth, where it met out was to what was called the Sea of Death. Though from their place they saw that many lived by the sea, they learned also that when one lay in the sea, they simply floated. Once this had been learned, they were unable to resist, and they all moved to the shallows of the sea to see the strange phenomenon. They, of course, all rejoiced in delight upon discovering that they indeed were able to float without effort in the water. It was a novel experience that had a lulling effect on their minds and produced a strongly meditative state in many. They found a small thicket of trees near the mouth of the river too, and they were given leave to cut down as many as they liked to build themselves fires for the night. This, of course, they would only be allowed to do once they built camp. Luckily, they had the whole day to do both. The work was done quickly, and soon they were relaxing, eating, drinking, and watching the sun set on the mountains. Many still lay, still and tranquil in the water, while the majority had had their fill of being wet that day. Fitbjorn sat beside and poured a drink for the wounded Harold, who tended his leg with care and jealous devotion. Harold had also refrained from entering the water of the sea that some told him was twice as salty as the ocean. Why do you think the water is thus? Asked Bodil. She wore her breeches and only a thin cloth around her shoulders, her hands warming on the fire. Niels, why don't you tell us? Asked Olaf. You sing of poetry. Why is the water so salty? I do indeed tell a story, but I do not know the reason of this place. So make it up, Hafald said. I like the idea. I want a story. I think I could tell of it, Fitbjorn said, and they all, of course, looked at him. He took a drink of water. If the skald will let me the moment to sing of story. Niels looked pleased and nodded. All eyes turned to Fitzbjorn, and he immediately felt very foolish. He took another drink from his horn and calmed. Then he thought about the thing he had seen in his vision, the worm, the horrific size of the Nidhogg. That thought planted within him an idea for a story. Thank the gods. It is not salt of our world, he started. He spoke slowly, and everyone looked upon him with this first sentence said, "The seas are salty by the grace and works of the gods, but what waters we sit by now are salted because of what thing sleeps under the water." He realized too late that he'd used the word water too often, a problem he still had, but kept on. "I think, though, sleep is the wrong word. Sleep is something we people do. Sleep is mortal and of this earth. What is down there?" He looked out to the dark and still water. "Is ever a different world. There lies something of Jotunheim, something old. There was a man who saw it once, a fisherman from near this place, but he never fished in this place. But he was on the water with his boat. He waited for someone to call him a fool, to tell him his story was terrible and lacked sense, but none did so." "What was his name?" asked Inga. "What is a good name from this region?" he asked. "Knut," said Hafald. "That is a name of our lands." Bodil said. Why not Mordecai?" said Olaf. That's a terrible name," Ragnar protested. "I could name him Jesus if you prefer," Fitbjorn said. "Mordecai, then." They all laughed together. Mordecai was the fisherman. He'd fished on the sea and fished on lakes, but when he heard of the Sea of Death, he thought he never would come here. Until he was told that there was a place in the middle of the lake that was cleaner waters, and where fish teemed in so huge a number they swelled from the waves. They all seemed still to be listening, so he kept on. "The man, Mordecai, rode out in the center of the water from this place, here, where the river meets with the sea, and he paddled through the dark and murk, his hope always that there would be for him a reward of a great haul. He rode furiously as a sudden storm blew up from nowhere, and the sands of the desert arose all around to obscure his way forward. Still did he row, for he would not be cheated of what he knew must be his best price. The sand of the storm choked him, and he was forced to tie a cloth around his head, and some part of him knew that this was no earthly storm he went through now. After much rowing and work did he find himself in the very center of the sea. He knew it was for the water was a different color here. Here he looked over the edge to see these famed loads of fish, but there was only the calm of the water. The storm, too, now had slowed, and when Mordecai observed around him, he saw that he was in the eye of the storm. There was a great circle of whirling winds and sands about him, and he was here in the calm center. He was then taken by a strange and horrid urge. He knew the fish were down there. With the strange certain knowledge of the Allfather, he knew he would find them. They were trapped in a circle of salted water, like the eye of the storm around him now. He needed only to agitate them from the depth. Of course, he too was practiced at holding his breath, and could do so for longer than any here can. He jumped into the water then, this sea here, and swam down, closer ever to where it was. All listened with captured fascination. He started then to feel strange currents and things brushing against him, and reasoned he must be feeling the fish. But no matter where he looked about him, he couldn't see any fish. There was light enough coming from above him that he could see around him, and still he saw no fish. But still, did he feel something brushing against him, as if swimming or slithering around? For a moment, he thinks that it could be eels in the water, and they are the ones he had disturbed to churn the water. Whenever it is, he cares not now, for he knows only that he needs to catch something this day. He looks below him then, through his feet, and looks as deep as he can. Then to his sight, he sees something there in the water with him. Mordecai witnesses the whole edge of his vision below shift as something enormous wriggles in the water under him. This thing, whatever he sees, the dark mass, is larger than any sea beast he's seen before. This is larger than all the whales he has ever seen, and larger. He remembered what he could see of the Nithog, that mind-shattering size. Its very shifting below has made the water around him sway like a wave, the size of a whole island. Then from the depths, where the great thing lurked, came up a shape toward him. So stilled was he in seeing the huge and horrid thing that he could not react now, as a piece of this nameless Jotnar came up toward him. Inga's shoulders went up, and she recoiled into a ball. "What was it?" asked Olaf, entranced. "It was the long fin of the impossible thing. It passed through the water, and as it did, he felt part of himself draining out with it, a part of his mind going from him. He drifted in the water, floating in a stupor. Then the long arm swept around again, and he felt again that horrid feeling of ripping from his very other. For a moment, he but floated, having lost the sense of who he was, but he managed to retain at least the desire for survival and climbed through the water to the surface. He breathed the air again, but didn't remember what it felt like. He was then somehow in his boat, but didn't remember how he had gotten in it. He left that place, but it was not really him who left. Mordecai was only the lick and small fragments left of the other, his Huger and Mjolnir shredded and devoured. Harold and Hafvald and Ragnar were breathing heavily by this point. "He still walks around these areas," Fitbjorn continued. "Mordecai, and not Mordecai. He is like a Draugr, who does not know what he is. His body and soul has forgotten how to die. Now only does he dream endlessly as he shambles. He does not know what he is looking for, does not know he will never be able to find it. What few memories still exist within the howling cavern that was once a mind are but echoes of what a soul is meant to be. His dreams are always of squirming mass of fins, and that endless dark there under the water of the sea of death. This great entity, the size of the sea itself, though only a piece, has broken through into our world, and it sleeps here, there. Perhaps in his more lucid moments, he realizes that the legends of the teeming fish were spread as rumors by the great dormant Jotnar itself. Realizes after that these stories, the storm, all of it, these were the real lures. The Jotnar is the one fishing, and he was the prey drawn in. He breathed out, long and slow, when he was done the story. He had no idea where so much of that had come from, but it had, and all flowed so well once he was started. For the story, he drew on the dread sense of helpless insignificance he had felt seeing the great root and the worm. "Where did that come from?" asked Bodil. She looked at him in disbelieving. "That is horrible." He looked at her. Had it been a bad story? "That's the most frightening thing that I've ever..." She looked to the sea of death. "That's the most frightening story I've ever heard," she said quietly. "White Cloak," Neil said. "That truly is. I haven't ever heard a story like that. That was amazing. I feel so..." He paused, looking for the word. "Small," Olaf said. "That horrified me. You should remember that when I am consoled in the fact that none of that can be real." "Of course it can be," Fitbjorn said. "There is great power among the worlds. We are not meant to understand them all, and can't understand. They escape our mortal knowledge." "Well, it's all nonsense to me," Ragnar said. "Still, you should tell that one again sometime," Niels added. "Or come up with more for other places," Bodil said. They're right, Fitbjorn. I think you have a knack for it. You were teaching the quiet one, weren't you? I didn't teach him that, Neil said. That was... I don't think I'd know how to teach that. If I must admit the truth, Fitbjorn said, garnering all attention again. Much that I saw and learned in my vision during the ceremony of Helheimer. I saw such visions of the gods that sight broke a part of me. He spoke wistfully, looking down into the fire. You're false gods, Ragnar said. Fitbjorn looked at him. The only gods who are false are those that none worship, my friend. Wait, Hafald said. Why does that make the water salt? You didn't finish. You told us the water was salty because of the Jotnar. How is that so? Because, Fitbjorn said, he had in fact forgotten about this. Because all the sea is the body of it. That is why. All the sea of death. And when we lay in it, it was eating us. He grinned at the distress this brought to Ragnar's face. Perhaps it is the only god that need no worship. It only wants to feed. That's nae funny, Ragnar said. Your blasphemy will nae sway me. I'm just glad it didn't get from the water. I didn't get into the water now. That was creepy, Harold said. To this, the others laughed, relieving some of the tension. Pagans, Ragnar said. What does that even mean? Bodil said. Is pagan just what you call our beliefs in the true gods? No, not just yours. Everyone. Everyone, Hafveld said in his usual deep voice. I know something of that word, said a voice with command and authority. All turned and saw the commander, Harald Sigurdsson, walk into their circle with a large water skin around his shoulder. I am glad of the opportunity to show to you this name. Drink! He gave to them the skin and Bodil was the first to take it and remove the stopper. She smelled the contents and then drank. Byzantine wine, she said, burping gratefully. Delicious! Hafald's hand went out and she passed it to him next. He sipped and then shared it with Inga. The word is pagan. The word pagan is Latin, in fact. You know it used to mean villager. Paganus was the Latin word. It meant person, then villager. And now it is used by Holy Mother Church to describe anyone who isn't Christian. So, yes, many here are pagan. The Circlanders are pagan too, Olaf said, though they are Muslim. I had heard in the Miklagard that the Circlander also respect the Lord Christ, Harold said. They blaspheme those, Ragnar interjected. They're heathen and pagans too. They dinna ken the love of Christ. No, I'm right. I have spoken with Muslims there, and they talk well of the Lord. No, Ragnar insisted. Christianity is the only path to righteous salvation. That's not what he's saying, though, Harold said. It is but that I know what the truth is. Muslims are heathen and dinna worship the Lord God truly. They're all bound for hell. He wavered some as he spoke, and then shook his head and blinked hard. All right, then, Olaf said. We are both Christians, are we not? Let us find peace in that. Wise words, Harold said quickly. Pickens are allowed their belief still in my army. He lowered and put a hand on Ragnar's shoulder. How better to convince them of the truth, then, eh? Ragnar nodded and looked away, shamefaced. Aye, he said quietly. Now, enjoy you all that wine. You are the heroes this night. I will not forget how you saved us there on the road. The bandits would have cut down 10 times the number were not you out there. Our shields. Axes, Fitbjorn corrected solemnly. Harold looked at him. With that great weapon there? Yes, you are my axe. You saved many Varangian. You deserve the wine, friends. Drink well and enjoy the night. We march on the morrow. Sleep well. He stood and pulled his shoulders back. And then he left. That's a good Christian commander there, Ragnar muttered. You know, Ragnar, Bodil said, leaning back, I think you should partake of the vision mead sometime. You might benefit from questing within. He looked at her angrily, and she unwrapped the cloth from herself, revealing her large breasts and ample belly. She leaned back and enjoyed the clear effect she was having on the man, smiling and accepting the wineskin from Inga. Hey, you're shameless women, he said, looking down. Yeah, she replied. Shame is something your god teaches. Mine does not. Thor values strength. Strength in all things, she said loudly. When in the hall, I shall drink mead mightily with the great and wondrous Thor. I shall hear his tales of the Jotnar he has slain. Perhaps I too shall tell of the one who lies under these waters, White Bear? The Thunder God would find as great a foe as the gargantuan Jormungandr, the World Serpent. Then perhaps the World Serpent would be better spent in fighting the Sea of Death Jotnar of yours, Neil said. Such a battle would shake the tree so much it would begin Ragnarok immediately. Nothing of Midgard would survive a cataclysm like that. Well, thankfully, we shall be long dead and fighting with the Einherjar when that takes place, Bodil said, looking into the fire and rolling her strong shoulders. Unless, of course, I am bound to be a priestess of Helheimer. Of course you're going to Hill, Ragnar said, still averting his eyes. You are so damn certain that is an insult. Hell is no place of curse to me, she said, leaning toward him, the fire casting jagged shadows upon her. Your god fears it, but Helheimer is a place of power for those who know how to speak with the goddess of the realm. She and I speak much. She grants me power you cannot know. Take the vision mead and travel with me, Ragnar. I will show you the depths of the world. You will see. You will have your world stripped and see the truth beneath the illusion. End of chapter 14. So, obviously, as many of you can figure out, I'm kind of cheating a little bit here. Fitbjorn discovering cosmic horror some thousand-ish years early, at least 900-ish years early. I still thought it was fun. I'm a huge fan of cosmic horror. I absolutely adore it. I find it fascinating. I have, as I've already mentioned, written 3 horror novels, and I tried to add some cosmic elements in there. It was a lot of fun. Additionally, the fact that I cited earlier that Jesus Christ is mentioned in the Quran is true. One of the more interesting facts that I learned while traveling in a Muslim country is that Jesus is mentioned by name. I think it was 25 times, so I could be wrong about that number. Talk about a crossover. Yep, that's my joke. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for listening.